It looked like a sudden act of betrayal. On a sweltering afternoon in the heart of New York City, a devoted service dog suddenly turned on his blind owner. Passers-by froze in horror as the golden retriever, known for his gentle nature, began to growl viciously, digging his claws into the asphalt and dragging the helpless musician away from the crosswalk. People screamed, phones came out to record the vicious attack, and a nearby police officer reached for his weapon. No one dared to intervene, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that in exactly 10 seconds, that intersection would turn into a zone of total destruction. And what looked like aggression was actually a desperate miracle that would leave the entire city speechless. Symphony of asphalt. The late afternoon sun baked the concrete of Fifth Avenue, turning the air into a thick, shimmering haze of heat and exhaust fumes. It was rush hour in Manhattan, a chaotic symphony of honking taxis, screeching brakes, and the relentless rhythm of thousands of footsteps hitting the pavement. For most people, the noise was just a headache. For Elias Thorne, it was a map. Elias stood near the entrance of a subway station, carefully wiping the rosin from his violin strings. He couldn't see the towering glass skyscrapers or the flashing billboards, but he knew the city better than anyone with perfect vision. He knew it by the smell of roasted nuts from the corner cart, the rattle of the subway vents beneath his feet, and the distinct click of the pedestrian signals. "All right, Buster," Elias whispered, his voice rough from hours of playing. "Let's go home, buddy. You earned your dinner." At his feet, Buster, a large golden retriever with a coat the color of honey, wagged his tail. The dog's harness was worn but sturdy, a symbol of the unbreakable bond between man and beast. For 5 years, Buster had been Elias's eyes. He navigated crowds, avoided puddles, and stopped at every curb with the precision of a soldier. He was perfect, or at least he had been until today. Elias packed his violin into its case, slinging it over his shoulder. He reached down, his hand finding the familiar leather handle of the harness. "Forward," Elias murmured. They moved into the flow of the sidewalk. Elias walked with confidence, trusting the tension in the handle to guide him. But today, the city felt different. The air was heavier, charged with a strange, static electricity that made the hair on Elias's arms stand up. The sounds of the street were sharper too. The distant wail of a siren seemed to linger longer than usual. The rumble of heavy trucks on the avenue felt like tremors running through the soles of his shoes. They reached the busy intersection of 5th and 42nd. The crowd bunched up around them, waiting for the light. Elias could smell the perfume of a woman to his left and the stale cigarette smoke of a man to his right. "Wait," Elias said softly, feeling the curb with the toe of his shoe. Buster sat instantly. A perfect stop. The traffic on the cross street roared past, a blur of wind and noise. Elias waited for the rhythm to change. He listened for the engines to slow, for the silence that signaled the red light for cars, and finally, for the rapid chirp, chirp, chirp of the pedestrian signal. Seconds ticked by. Sweat trickled down Elias's temple. Then, the tone changed. The heavy engines died down. The audible signal began its rhythmic beeping. "Walk sign is on to cross 5th Avenue, the automated voice announced. The crowd around them surged forward like a wave. Shoulders brushed against Elias as people hurried to get across before the timer ran out. "Forward, Buster," Elias commanded, taking a step. But the harness didn't move. Elias paused, confused. Usually, Buster was the first one off the curb. He tugged gently on the handle. "Buster, forward. Let's go." Nothing. The dog was planted like a statue. "Come on, boy, we're losing the light," Elias said, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. He tried to step around the dog, thinking maybe there was an obstacle he couldn't sense. That was when the sound happened. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a whine. It was a low, guttural growl that vibrated up the leather handle and straight into Elias's hand. It was a sound of primal fear, deep and terrifying. Elias froze. "Buster?" Suddenly, the dog jerked backward. He didn't just pull. He yanked with enough force to make Elias stumble. "Hey!" Elias shouted, trying to regain his balance. "What are you doing? Move it, buddy! It's green!" Someone yelled from behind him. "Get your dog under control!" Another voice snapped. Elias felt a wave of panic. He couldn't see what was wrong. Was there another dog? A hole in the road? He tried to command Buster again, his voice firmer this time. "Buster, forward!" But instead of obeying, the golden retriever did something he had never done in 5 years of service. He let out a sharp, frantic bark, a sound so loud it cut through the noise of the traffic, and planted his paws firmly on the pavement, refusing to let his master take a single step toward the open road. And in the distance, unnoticed by the angry crowd, a low, mechanical rumble began to grow louder. The eyes of the law officer, Mike O'Connor, stood on the corner of 5th and 42nd, sweat trickling down his back beneath his Kevlar vest. He adjusted his sunglasses, squinting against the glare bouncing off the yellow taxis. He'd been on the force for 15 years, and if there was one thing he hated more than the heat, it was disorder. And right now, his intersection was getting messy. "Keep it moving! Don't block the box!" Mike shouted, waving a gloved hand at a delivery truck, trying to squeeze through a yellow light. He scanned the crowd with practiced indifference. Tourists looking at maps, business people screaming into phones, teenagers laughing too loud. It was all just noise. Until he saw the commotion near the subway entrance. A bottleneck was forming on the pedestrian ramp. People were stopping, pointing, and murmuring. That specific kind of murmur that usually meant trouble, a fight, a medical emergency, or someone causing a scene. Mike sighed, resting his hand on his belt. "What now?" he muttered. He pushed off the lamppost and started wading through the crowd. As he got closer, the voices became distinct. "Hey, move it! What is wrong with that animal? Someone call security!" Mike broke through the ring of onlookers and saw the source of the chaos. It wasn't a fight. It was a blind man and his dog. The man looked terrified, clutching a violin case with one hand and the harness handle with the other. He was trying to step forward, toward the crosswalk where the walk signal was ticking down its final seconds. But the dog, a golden retriever that should have been the picture of discipline, was having none of it. To Mike, a service dog was like a police weapon, a tool. It had a job. It followed orders. If it didn't follow orders, it was defective. And a defective animal in a crowd this dense was a liability. "Officer!" a woman in a business suit called out, pointing a manicured finger. "That dog is aggressive. It just snapped at me." Mike's jaw tightened. He stepped into the clearing, his presence immediately parting the bystanders. All right, back up," Mike commanded, his voice booming over the traffic. He looked at the blind man. "Sir, you need to get moving or step back. You're blocking the flow." I'm trying, officer," Elias stammered, his face pale. "He won't move. I don't know what's wrong with him. He's never done this." "Forward, Buster." Elias tried again, desperation cracking his voice. He tugged on the harness. The response was immediate and shocking. The retriever didn't just refuse, he lunged backward, his claws scraping a harsh sound against the concrete. The movement was so violent, it nearly pulled Elias off his feet. Mike took a step closer, his hand drifting instinctively toward the taser on his hip. This wasn't normal resistance. The dog's ears were pinned flat against its skull. Its lips were curled back, revealing white teeth, and a low, rumbling growl was vibrating in its chest. "Sir, control your animal," Mike barked. "Get him away from the curb. Now." "I can't," Elias cried. "Buster, stop it. What do you see?" Mike watched the scene with growing irritation. The light for the cars on the avenue had turned red almost 5 seconds ago. The crosswalk was open. The crowd was getting angry, shouting insults at the blind man for holding them up. "He's dangerous," a college kid with a backpack yelled, holding up his phone to record. "Look at his eyes. He's going to bite him." Mike looked at the dog's eyes. They weren't focused on Elias. They weren't focused on the crowd. The dog was staring intensely up the avenue, past the stopped cars, past the intersection. It looked like madness. A service dog rebelling against its training for no reason. "Sir, if you can't control that dog, I'm going to have to intervene," Mike warned, stepping within reach. He reached for the leash, intending to pull the pair back to the safety of the building wall. "No, wait," Elias pleaded, sensing the officer's approach. "Don't touch him. He's scared." "He's not scared. He's snapping," Mike countered, grabbing the musician's arm to steer him away. At that moment, Elias gave the command again. "Buster, forward! We have to go!" Instead of obeying, Buster did the unthinkable. He released a sharp, explosive bark that sounded more like a scream. Then, he buried his teeth into the cuff of Elias's jeans, not breaking the skin, but gripping the fabric with iron strength, and threw his entire weight backward. Elias yelled as he was dragged violently away from the curb, his shoes skidding on the grit. The crowd gasped, backing away in a wave of panic. "He's attacking him!" someone shrieked. Mike unclipped his taser. "Get back!" he shouted at the crowd. This was it. The dog had turned. But as Mike raised his weapon, ready to fire, a sound pierced the air. It wasn't a siren. It wasn't a honk. It was a high-pitched mechanical screech, like metal being torn apart, followed by the terrifying, deepening roar of a heavy engine accelerating out of control. Mike froze. His police instincts, honed over 15 years of patrolling these streets, suddenly screamed a warning that had nothing to do with the dog. He looked up. He looked where the dog was looking, and the color drained from his face. Mutiny on the crosswalk. Sarah Jenkins, a 20-year-old film student, held her phone steady, though her hands were shaking. She had started recording the moment the commotion began, thinking she would capture a typical New York argument. Instead, she was filming a nightmare. Through her screen, the scene looked horrific. The golden retriever, teeth bared, was practically mauling the blind man's pant leg, dragging him backward like a rag doll. The man was screaming, stumbling, his violin case hitting the pavement with a sickening crack. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, the audio picking up her trembling voice. "He's going to kill him. Someone help him." Around her, the mob mentality had snapped into place. The shock had turned into outrage. "Get off him!" a woman screamed, swinging her purse at the dog. Buster didn't even flinch. He didn't care about the purse. He didn't care about the shouting. His claws were scraping white lines into the asphalt as he dug in, fighting for every inch of backward momentum. His eyes were wide, rimmed with white, the universal sign of an animal in terror. But he wasn't looking at the people attacking him. He was looking past Officer O'Connor, past the intersection. "I can't hold him," Elias yelled, tears streaming from under his dark glasses. He was disoriented, his world spinning in a vortex of noise. "Buster, release! What is wrong with you?" Elias felt the dog's weight shifting, jerking him further toward the building wall. But to the crowd, it looked like the animal was trying to drag him into an alley to finish the job. A man in a gray business suit, emboldened by the officer's presence, decided he had seen enough. He was big, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who played linebacker in high school and never let anyone forget it. "I got you, buddy," the stranger roared. He lunged forward, not at the dog, but at Elias. "No!" Officer O'Connor shouted, his voice cracking, but he was too far away, separated by the shifting wall of bodies. The stranger grabbed Elias's free arm. "Let go of the dog! I'll pull you out!" It was a tug of war with a human life in the balance. On one side was the stranger, fueled by adrenaline and a misguided sense of heroism, pulling Elias toward the street, toward the open air of the crosswalk where safety supposedly waited. On the other side was Buster. The dog let out a sound that wasn't a bark but a desperate high-pitched yelp. He clamped his jaws harder on the denim, shaking his head, putting all 80 pounds of his muscle into dragging his master away from the road. "Let me go!" Elias screamed, panic finally overtaking him. He didn't know who was pulling him where. He only knew that his dog, his partner, his eyes, was trembling violently. "He's ripping his leg off!" Sarah yelled at her phone, zooming in on the struggle. "Shoot it!" "Officer, shoot the dog!" Officer Mike O'Connor didn't shoot. He didn't even look at the dog anymore. He was staring 50 yards up the avenue, where the reality of the situation was barreling toward them at 60 miles an hour. The sound was deafening now, a mechanical scream that drowned out the shouting of the crowd. A massive cement mixer, its brakes smoking, its horn blasting a futile warning, was careening down the slope of the avenue. It was swerving wildly, crushing a street sign like a toothpick, heading straight for the red light, straight for the crowded crosswalk, straight for the exact spot where the stranger was trying to pull Elias. "Get back!" Mike screamed, his voice raw. He abandoned protocol. He abandoned the dog. He threw himself forward, shoving people violently onto the sidewalk. "Run! Everyone run!" The stranger in the gray suit looked up, confused by the officer's panic. He still had Elias's arm. He was one step away from the curb, one step away from saving the blind man. "What?" the stranger started. Then the shadow fell over them. The ground shook. The air was suddenly sucked away, replaced by the hot metallic stench of burning rubber and impending death. Buster didn't wait. Sensing the shift in air pressure, the dog gave one final explosive yank. The denim of Elias's jeans tore with a loud rip. Elias lost his footing completely, falling backward onto the hard concrete, pulling the stranger off balance with him. They hit the ground in a tangle of limbs just as the world ended. The shadow of death. 2 blocks up Fifth Avenue, inside the cab of the massive cement mixer, 50-year-old Joe Miller was screaming. His foot was stomped flat against the floorboard, pressing a brake pedal that offered zero resistance. It felt like stepping into a bucket of water. The hydraulic line had burst 3 seconds ago, spraying fluid onto the hot asphalt behind him, leaving the 20-ton beast completely untethered from the laws of physics. "Move! Move! Move!" Joe shrieked, laying on the horn. He saw the intersection coming up. He saw the red light. He saw the wall of pedestrians crossing 42nd Street. He had 2 choices: swerve right into the crowded sidewalk and kill dozens, or try to thread the needle through the intersection and crash into the parked cars on the far side. He chose the gap. He yanked the wheel, closing his eyes as the truck mounted the curb, shearing off a fire hydrant with a sound like a cannon blast. Back at the crosswalk, time seemed to distort. For Officer Mike O'Connor, the world slowed down to a frame-by-frame horror movie. He watched the gray blur of the truck enter his peripheral vision. It was moving too fast to be real. It wasn't driving. It was falling horizontally. Mike saw the front bumper of the truck, a slab of reinforced steel covered in road dust, clip the traffic light pole. The pole didn't bend. It vaporized. It snapped at the base and went spinning into the air like a baton. Then, the truck occupied the space where the crosswalk used to be. The wind pressure alone was like a physical blow. It hit the crowd before the metal did. People were knocked off their feet by the shockwave of displaced air, and right there, in the center of the kill zone, lay Elias and the stranger. Or they would have been there. If the stranger had succeeded in pulling Elias upright, if Buster hadn't ripped the denim of his master's jeans, if they hadn't fallen backward in that tangled heap 1 second earlier, they would have been pink mist. Instead, the massive rubber tires of the truck screamed past their heads, missing them by less than 12 inches. The heat from the engine block washed over them, hot enough to singe hair. The roar was so loud it wasn't heard. It was felt, rattling teeth and vibrating bones. Crash. The sound of the final impact was apocalyptic. The cement mixer plowed through the intersection, jumped the far curb, and slammed broadside into a row of parked delivery vans and a newsstand. Glass shattered, metal crumpled like paper. A cloud of dust, concrete powder, and steam exploded outward, swallowing the entire block in a gray fog. Then, silence. It was a heavy, ringing silence, the kind that follows a bomb blast. No one screamed, no one moved. The violence of the event had been so sudden, so absolute, that the human brain couldn't process it. Officer Mike O'Connor was on his knees, his ears ringing. He coughed, waving his hand in front of his face to clear the dust. "Status!" he choked out, his training kicking in on autopilot. I need a status." He looked toward the crosswalk. The street was unrecognizable. The walk sign lay twisted in the gutter. The asphalt was gouged deep, scarred by the truck's rims. Debris was everywhere, shattered side mirrors, pieces of the newsstand, a crushed bicycle. "The blind guy," Mike whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. Oh, God, the blind guy. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling through the haze. He expected to see bodies. He expected the worst. He reached the spot where he had seen them fall. Huddled against the brick wall of the corner building, covered in a layer of gray dust, was a pile of humanity. The stranger in the gray suit was sitting up, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream of shock. He was staring at the tire marks that were etched into the ground inches from his expensive Italian loafers, and beside him was Elias. The musician was curled into a fetal position, shaking violently. He was alive. But he wasn't alone. Draped over Elias's head and chest, shielding him from the falling glass and debris, was Buster. The golden retriever was pressing his body flat against his master, his paws covering Elias's face. The dog wasn't growling anymore. He wasn't barking. He was whining softly, frantically licking the dust off Elias's cheek, checking for a pulse, checking for life. Mike dropped to his knees beside them. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the dog's flank. "Hey," Mike rasped. "Hey, buddy." Buster lifted his head. His golden coat was matted with dirt. There was a small cut above his left eye, bleeding sluggishly where a piece of flying debris had nicked him. But his eyes were calm. The dog looked at the officer, then looked at the decimated street where the truck had passed, and finally looked back at Elias. He gave a single short huff of breath as if to say, "I told you." The stranger in the gray suit finally found his voice. He turned to Mike, his face a mask of horror and realization. He pointed a shaking finger at the tire tracks that cut right through the crosswalk, right where he had been trying to drag Elias moments ago. "I tried," the stranger stammered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. "I tried to pull him out there. I thought the dog was crazy." He looked at Buster, who was now nudging Elias's chin, trying to get him to sit up. "He wasn't attacking him," the stranger whispered, his voice breaking. "He was anchoring him." Mike looked at the devastation. He looked at the path of the truck. He did the math in his head. If Buster had obeyed the command to go forward, dead. If Buster had merely stopped and not pulled back, dead. If Buster hadn't fought the stranger and ripped the jeans, causing the fall, dead. "Yeah," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. He holstered his taser, feeling a wave of shame wash over him for almost using it. He wasn't crazy. He heard it coming. Before any of us. From the dust cloud, Sarah Jenkins emerged, her phone still recording. She lowered it slowly, staring at the dog with something like reverence. "He saved him," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet street. "He saved all of us." Elias finally sat up, coughing. He reached out blindly, his hands frantic. "Buster! Buster!" The dog immediately pressed his wet nose into Elias's palm. Elias grabbed the dog's neck, burying his face in the dirty fur, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," Elias cried, rocking back and forth. "I'm sorry I tried to make you go." "Good boy. You're such a good boy." Around them, the silence broke. Sirens began to wail in the distance, closing in from all sides. But for a moment, no one on that corner cared about the police or the fire trucks. They were all watching the dog. The dog they had called a monster. The dog they had tried to kick. The dog that had just performed a miracle. The sound of silence. The adrenaline that had saved them was now wearing off, replaced by a cold, shaking shock. The intersection of 5th and 42nd was a disaster zone. Fire trucks had arrived, their lights painting the twilight in flashing reds and whites. The air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and diesel fuel. Paramedics moved like ghosts through the fog of dust, triaging the injured drivers and pedestrians who had been hit by flying debris. Officer Mike O'Connor stood over Elias, acting as a human shield against the chaos. "Sir, we need to check you for concussion," a paramedic said, trying to shine a penlight into Elias's eyes. "I'm blind," Elias croaked, his voice trembling. "It won't help." He pushed the paramedic's hand away gently. "Check the dog, please. Just check the dog." Buster was sitting, not standing, beside Elias. The golden retriever was panting heavily, his pink tongue lolling out. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, but there was something wrong with the way he was holding his front left paw. He kept it lifted slightly off the ground, trembling. "He's limping," Mike said, crouching down. He reached out, but Buster let out a low, sharp whine and pulled back. "It's glass," the paramedic observed, glancing at the paw. "He walked right through the windshield debris to get to you. He needs a vet. He needs stitches." Elias's face crumbled. He reached out, his hands searching the pavement until he found the thick fur of Buster's neck. I don't have a vet nearby. I take the subway." "You're not taking the subway anywhere," Mike said firmly. "Not looking like that." Elias tried to stand, using the wall for support. As he shifted his weight, a sickening crunch echoed from beneath his boot. It sounded like dry bones snapping. Elias froze. He knew that sound. It was a sound worse than the truck crash. He slowly crouched down, his fingers brushing the asphalt until they touched polished wood, or what was left of it. His violin case had been crushed in the fall. The instrument inside, A vintage replica he had spent 10 years paying off. The tool that put food in his bowl and paid for his rent was splintered into 1,000 useless pieces. The neck was snapped clean off. The body was crushed flat. "No," Elias whispered. He picked up a handful of splinters, his fingers shaking. No, no, no. He didn't cry out. He just slumped against the wall, looking smaller than Mike had ever seen a man look. He had survived death, but his life was destroyed. "My music," Elias murmured, tears leaking from under his dark glasses. "It's gone." Mike felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at the stranger in the gray suit, the man who had tried to save Elias. The man was standing a few feet away, staring at the broken violin with a look of utter devastation. "I did that," the stranger whispered. "When I pulled him, I dropped him on it." Mike stood up, adjusting his belt. He made a decision. "Unit 4 Alpha to dispatch." Mike spoke into his radio. "I'm transporting 2 victims to the West Side Veterinary Clinic, then to a residence." "Negative, 4 Alpha," the dispatcher crackled. "Ambulances are for humans. Patrol cars are for patrols." Mike looked at the dog who was licking his bloody paw. He looked at Elias, clutching the broken wood. "Dispatch, I wasn't asking," Mike said, clicking the radio off. He turned to Elias. "Grab your dog, sir. You're riding in the front." The upload. While Mike was breaking protocol, Sarah Jenkins sat on the curb a block away, her thumbs flying across her phone screen. She had rewatched the video 10 times. Every time it gave her chills. The angle was shaky, but the narrative was clear. You could see the moment the dog froze. You could hear the crowd screaming at him. You could see the stranger pulling, the dog fighting, the terrifying yank backward, and then boom, the truck filling the frame. She trimmed the clip. She didn't add music. It didn't need it. She typed a caption. "Everyone thought this service dog was attacking his blind owner. We were screaming at him to stop. We were wrong. He heard the truck before any of us. He didn't attack. He saved him. Hero dog. Service dog. BRNYC. Miracle." Her finger hovered over the post button. She had 400 followers on TikTok, mostly friends from college. She expected maybe a few likes, maybe a comment or two about how scary it was. She hit post. Upload complete. Sarah stood up, wiping dust from her jeans, and headed for the subway. She didn't look at her phone for the 20-minute ride home to Brooklyn. When she finally walked into her apartment and connected to the Wi-Fi, her phone didn't just ding. It vibrated so hard, it nearly buzzed out of her hand. 10,000 views, 50,000 views, 100,000 views. The notifications were scrolling so fast she couldn't read them. User 882. I'm crying. The way he covered him with his body. Dog mom. Official. We don't deserve dogs. We really don't. NY guy. I was there. I saw this. That dog is a legend. But then the comments started to shift. The internet detectives had arrived. Eagle Eye 22. Wait. Pause at 048. Look at the blind guy when he stands up. He steps on his violin. Look at his face. He's heartbroken. Music lover. OMG, you're right. That's his livelihood. He just lost everything. Rescue team. Does anyone know who this man is? We need to find him. That dog needs medical care. Look at his paw. Sarah stared at the screen. The video had just crossed 1 million views in under an hour. She grabbed her laptop. She had to do something. She replied to the top comment. I filmed this. I don't know his name, but the officer took him away in a patrol car. I'm going to find him. The internet had a new mission, and nothing moves faster than millions of people looking for a hero to save. The morning after, Elias sat in his small, cramped apartment in Queens. It smelled of old paper and boiled tea. Buster lay on his rug, his left paw heavily bandaged. The vet bill sat on the kitchen table. $100 and $200, stitches, x-rays, antibiotics. Officer O'Connor had paid the deposit out of his own pocket, promising to figure it out later, but Elias knew he couldn't pay him back. Not without a violin. The broken pieces of his instrument lay on the sofa. Elias ran his fingers over the splintered wood. It felt like touching a corpse. I'm sorry, Buster, Elias whispered into the dark room. I don't know what we're going to do. Buster thumped his tail once, a slow, rhythmic beat against the floorboards. Even in pain, he was trying to comfort his master. Elias felt a wave of hopelessness. He was a blind musician with no instrument, a mountain of debt, and an injured dog. The miracle of survival was starting to feel like a curse. Then, his old flip phone began to ring. Elias ignored it. Who would call him? It rang again and again. Finally, he picked it up. "Hello? Is this Elias Thorne?" a voice asked. It sounded professional, urgent. "Yes? Mr. Thorne, this is a producer from Good Morning America. Have you seen the internet today?" Elias frowned. I don't use the internet, ma'am. I'm blind." There was a pause on the other end, a pause filled with excitement. "Mr. Thorne," the producer said, her voice trembling slightly, "you need to sit down. There are about 30 million people asking about you and your dog, and they want to help." Elias sat up straight. "Help? Help with what?" "With everything," she said. "Open your door, Elias. Look outside." "I can't look," he reminded her gently. "Then listen," she said. Elias stood up and walked to his window. He cracked it open. At first, he heard the usual sounds of Queens, traffic, a siren, but then he heard something else. Voices, dozens of them. "We love you, Buster. Elias, we're here for you." He heard the click of cameras. He heard the rumble of news vans. Elias stumbled back, tripping over the rug. Buster barked, a happy, alert bark, and limped to the door. Elias didn't know it yet, but the miracle on Fifth Avenue hadn't ended with the crash. It was just beginning, and the world was about to show him that sometimes, when you lose everything, you find out exactly how much you are worth. The science of a miracle. The sidewalk outside Elias's apartment building had turned into a pilgrimage site. When Elias finally opened the front door, holding Buster's leash with a trembling hand, a hush fell over the crowd. It wasn't just reporters, it was neighbors, shopkeepers, and strangers who had taken the train from the Bronx and Brooklyn. Officer Mike O'Connor was there, standing guard by the stoop, looking exhausted, but grimly satisfied. He stepped forward, raising a hand to keep the cameras back. "Give them room," Mike ordered. "He's recovering." A reporter from Channel 4 thrust a microphone forward. "Officer, can you explain what happened? How did the dog know? Experts are calling it impossible." Mike looked at Buster, who was sitting regally despite the bandage on his paw, his tail sweeping the concrete. "We had the forensic team at the crash site this morning," Mike said, his voice projecting for the cameras. "They found the brake line of the truck. It didn't just snap, it disintegrated." He paused, letting the tension build. The engineers say that when a hydraulic line fails under that kind of pressure, it emits a high-frequency hiss, a sound pitch far above what human ears can detect. It happens milliseconds before the mechanical failure. Mike pointed at the golden retriever. Buster didn't just hear a truck coming, he heard the machine dying. He heard the mechanical scream of the brakes failing 3 blocks away, through the noise of the city, through the concrete, and he knew exactly what it meant. The crowd murmured in awe. "He calculated the speed," Mike continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He calculated the trajectory, and he knew that if his owner took one step forward, he was a dead man. So he broke his training to save a life." Elias stood there, stunned. He reached down, stroking Buster's head. "You heard it?" he whispered. "You heard it all?" Buster leaned into his leg, looking up with soft amber eyes. "But that's not all," the reporter said, turning to Elias. "Mr. Thorne, are you aware of the fundraiser?" Elias shook his head. "Fundraiser?" Officer O'Connor cleared his throat, looking a bit embarrassed. I set up a page last night, just to cover the vet bills. I put a goal of 2,000 and..." Elias asked. The reporter smiled. She pulled out her phone. "As of 10 minutes ago, the Hero Dog Fund has reached 150,000. Elias's knees buckled. Mike caught him by the arm. "It's for the vet," the reporter listed off. "It's for a new violin, it's for rent, and it's for a lifetime supply of steaks for Buster." Elias covered his face with his hands, sobbing. But these weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of disbelief. "Thank you," he choked out. "Thank you." But the biggest surprise wasn't the money. It was the man pushing his way through the crowd, holding a large white cooler box, his face pale and eyes red from crying. It was the stranger from the intersection. Redemption on Fifth Avenue. The crowd parted as the man in the gray suit approached. He looked different today, humbled, broken. The arrogance of the hero who had tried to pull Elias into the street was gone. He stopped at the bottom of the stoop. He looked at Elias, and then he looked at the dog. "Mr. Thorne?" the man said, his voice cracking. Elias tilted his head. "I know that voice. You're the one who grabbed me." The crowd went silent. Tension spiked. This was the man the internet had villainized, the man who had almost killed them both. "My name is Robert," the man said, dropping to his knees right there on the sidewalk. He didn't care about his suit. He didn't care about the cameras. I came to say I'm sorry. I thought I was helping. I thought he was hurting you." Robert looked at Buster. The dog watched him, ears perked. "I almost killed you," Robert sobbed, placing the cooler on the ground. "I haven't slept. I can't close my eyes without seeing those tire tracks." Elias stood still for a long moment. He tapped his cane against the step. "Buster," Elias said softly. "Greet." It was a command of permission. Buster didn't hesitate. He limped down the stairs, tail wagging slowly. He approached the weeping man who had wrestled him, the man who had screamed at him. Buster sniffed Robert's face. Then he leaned forward and licked the tears off the man's cheek. The crowd gasped. A few people wiped their own eyes. "He forgives you," Elias said, his voice gentle. "Dogs don't hold grudges, Robert. They only hold love. If he forgives you, then I do too." Robert opened the cooler with shaking hands. Inside were 10 pounds of the highest quality filet mignon steaks. "For him," Robert whispered, "it's the least I can do." Buster sniffed the meat, his tail going into overdrive. Officer O'Connor stepped forward, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder. "Get up, son. You made a mistake, but you're making it right." Elias smiled, a genuine bright smile that transformed his face. "Well, Buster," he said, "looks like we're having a barbecue." The Guardian of the Green Light. 2 weeks later, the intersection of 5th and 42nd was closed again. But this time, there were no sirens, no screams, and no crashing trucks. There was a stage. A podium stood right over the spot where the crosswalk had been repainted. The mayor of New York adjusted the microphone, looking out at the sea of people. Thousands had gathered. "We are a city of noise," the mayor began. "We are a city of speed. We rush. We ignore. We walk past miracles every day because we are too busy looking at our phones." He gestured to the side of the stage. But one resident of this city was listening. Elias walked out wearing a new suit. In his hand was a violin case made of polished dark wood, a gift from the New York Philharmonic. And beside him, walking without a limp, was Buster. The golden retriever wore a new harness, and attached to it, glittering in the sunlight, was a heavy gold medal. The key to the city, specially adapted for a collar. The crowd erupted. It was a roar loud enough to shake the skyscrapers. Buster looked at the crowd. He didn't bark. He didn't shy away. He sat down, puffing out his chest, accepting the adulation with the quiet dignity of a king. Elias stepped to the microphone. He didn't make a speech. He opened his case. He lifted the new violin to his chin. He raised the bow, and he began to play. He played Amazing Grace. The notes floated over the silent avenue, haunting and sweet. It was a song of redemption, of being lost and then found, of being blind but now seeing. As the final note faded into the air, Elias lowered the bow. He reached down and rested his hand on Buster's head. "Forward," Elias whispered. Buster stood up. The crowd parted to let them through. They walked down the center of 5th Avenue, a man and his dog walking into a future that had been bought and paid for by loyalty. Officer Mike O'Connor watched them go, wiping a single tear from under his sunglasses. He looked at the traffic light. It turned green. "Go on, buddy," Mike whispered. "You lead the way." And as the camera pulled back, capturing the small figure of the dog guiding his master through the concrete canyon, the screen faded to black with one final message. Not all heroes wear capes, some wear collars, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to move. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and share it with someone you love. And tell us in the comments, what would you give your dog if they saved your life? For me, this story is a powerful reminder that we shouldn't judge a situation or a creature until we know the full truth. We are often so busy rushing through life, looking at our phones or worrying about being late, that we miss the subtle warnings around us. Buster didn't care about the angry crowd or the police officer's orders. He only cared about saving his human. It makes you wonder how many times our pets perceive things that we are completely blind to. What would you have done if you were the stranger in the suit? Would you have tried to pull Elias into the street? Let me know in the comments below, and if this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe.